Well, once again, good morning. And Craig, thank you so much for joining us today.
Now, you're welcome.
Today we are talking all about leadership, what works, what doesn't, and how to affect transformation and change in a way that matters. Of course, at the moment we are dealing with possibly one of the biggest transformational changes of our time, and that is the energy transition. Now, Craig, you've had such an interesting career. You have held senior leadership positions at places like Sandhurst, Coca-Cola, Aon as well. These days you advise governments, corporates, elite athletes. You're doing some fantastic work with DEWA at the moment as well. Now, you've said that leadership is the single most critical factor in change, and yet research shows that around 70% of organisations fail to meet their objectives. Yeah. So from all of your experience, what is the one trait that separates leaders that actually deliver on transformation versus those who just announce it?
It's a tough old question, because I think there are a number of key factors here. But if I was to boil it down to one thing, I'd describe it as discipline. Okay. So that's discipline in creating a sense of urgency and a vision. That's discipline in planning for the change, and it's discipline in the execution of that plan. Some people may be familiar with a book called Good to Great, which is written by a chap called Jim Collins. And it looks at research into nearly 1,500 different organizations to identify the ones that have made the leap from being good to outstanding over time. And it identifies 11, that's all, 11. But what differentiates those from all the others is a culture of discipline. So disciplined thought and disciplined action. And that isn't discipline with a big stick. That's discipline doing what you're supposed to do, when you're supposed to do it, again and again and again, and having good habits, good ways of working, good ways of managing and obtaining the management information to make good decisions. So, yeah, summing it all up and wrapping it all up in one word, probably discipline.
Okay, I like that. I think really taking that ambition from what it is on paper and really turning it into execution is not easy, but certainly is key. Now, in this part of the world, I think the UAE is often held up as a real global case study for transformation. I've been here 15 years, and I am frequently overwhelmed at the different changes that have been taking place. We were mentioning earlier, I think in many respects, and I mean this as a compliment, I think the UAE government very much has a startup mindset. It's very comfortable at doing something differently, and if it works, that's fantastic. If it doesn't, it has that fail fast startup mentality that I think a lot of the old Western nations just have not really understood the concept of that. We've seen incredible projects here like Mazda. Yesterday we were talking a lot about the Mohammed bin Rashid solar park, the largest single-site solar park in the world, already powering hundreds of thousands of homes here in Dubai. Now, you're consulting with DEWA on some really exciting, ambitious, innovative projects at the moment. So you have a really interesting behind-the-scenes look at what's going on. Tell me, why is it that these projects have really succeeded when maybe similar projects in other parts of the world have either stalled or not eventuated at all?
Well, I think you've identified a few already. I'd add to that list His Highness's work on creating an aviation hub for the whole region and the world, really. You just need to look at Dubai itself and see the extraordinary growth and transformation in the place, architecturally and so on. And also economic diversification, which was risky. Yeah. It's bold, it's risky, it's brave. If you look at the work that His Excellency Syed Mohammed Al Taya has done as CEO of DEWA, the digital transformation that's been successful, and more recently, you've got the resource efficiency, where they are now global leaders, and right now, AI integration, which are big, bold initiatives where they're taking the lead. And I think there's a really important component to that, which is clarity of vision, and consistency of message. Consistency of message around the communication. So there was a my own experience working with Aon. The CEO of Aon is a chap called Greg Case. He's based in Chicago, and on a regular basis he'd come to London to talk to us and run town halls. And it had a funny effect on you when you'd listen to him, because he would reinforce the same message every time. The purpose of Aon and what it was trying to achieve, which was he was trying to unite the firm. This was an organization that over 25 years had gone from a startup to the largest insurance broker in the world. So a lot of acquisitions globally. So every time he'd come in and he'd say the same thing: we're here to unite the firm, we're going to unite the firm. And you'd wait for him, he'd say the same thing, which would give you reassurance, we're still on the same journey, and you'd feel much more comfortable when you left the building. Funnily enough, for those of you that follow football, you might remember that Aon sponsored Manchester United for a number of years and still do their training ground. But the purpose of that sponsorship was internal, not external. It was to unite the firm, to give everybody globally something in common.
Interesting.
And that was Manchester United.
I didn't know that, actually. I saw Man U actually play Chelsea the other week, actually. And I think you raise an important point there. I think messaging is key. In fact, research shows that when someone tells us something, we only take in 50% of what they tell us.
Yeah.
The next day, that falls to 25%, and a week later, it's only 10%. So how do we make that message stick? So some big success cases.
Yeah.
Let's look at the flip side of history. Names like Blockbuster, Kodak, those big companies that really missed the digital revolution as well. And I think often business leaders say we tend to learn more from our failures than our successes. Now, Craig, you've shared a fascinating video with us. We're going to play it in just a moment about what went wrong. So let's hear from Steve Armstrong, the former CEO of Ford Europe, Middle East and Africa, sharing his perspective on the change that didn't succeed. Let's take a look. So some great examples there from Steve as well. A lot of talk about short-term versus long-term. Craig, what really stands out to you, when we look at these real, leadership failures, what is it that seals the fate of so many of these different initiatives?
I think Steve really hit the nail on the head there, and I've seen this in a lot of organizations, which is the balance between long-term strategy and short-term success. And it's a cultural norm over the years that, and I've been in organizations which have had the same challenge, that performance is measured on a quarterly basis, bonuses are paid on a quarterly basis, share prices go up and down on quarterly performance. So it's fine talking about the long term, but we still have to deal with the short term. Now, people bear with me here, I'm going to leap away to sport again. And if you look at, for example, the English Premier League, if your manager goes into a club, says, I've got a great plan for the future, we're going to have a new academy, we're going to have a new recruiting system, we're going to have a new stadium, one or two different new players and so on, that's fine. But of course, very quickly, the supporters, the owners, the shareholders will say, but are you going to win on Saturday? You didn't win last Saturday. So very quickly, the long term is forgotten because we're dealing with the short term. What I've seen both here and in organizations where they've succeeded is being able to manage expectations in the short term, which might mean a little dip, in order that they can accelerate. It's a bit, you've got to slow down before you go around a corner and accelerate. So that's slowing down is something, and managing expectations that's really important.
I like that. Obviously, you work a lot with elite athletes as well. You said often they tend to be more open to change than sometimes corporates or governments. What are some examples? And does it surprise you that the elite athletes, the ones who are already pretty near the top of their game, are the ones who are really open to change? Well,
they're open to change because their mindset is all about performance. And there's a phrase which I picked up. We were doing work with UK Sport a few years ago. That there's a curse of the elite athlete. Yep. The curse of the elite athlete is never being satisfied by their performance. So it doesn't matter whether they're number one. How do they get forward? Which is why they're looking for data. They're looking for new ways of doing things. They're looking for ways to improve their performance. I'm always struck by, golfers who are at the top of their game and how much time they put into getting another coach and so on. I once hired an individual to work for me at Aon who previously had been a professional cricketer, and he was a batsman.
Can you name any names for us? This is the same
no,
space.
it's all right. He was a chap called Stephen Peters. He actually worked, or rather played for a county team in England. He never played against Australia. But he was a batsman, and he had a batting coach, a fielding coach, a strength and conditioning coach, a head coach, a nutritionist, and a psychologist.
Wow.
So he had 6 coaches to allow him to bat, and he was looking for ways to improve all the time. When he came to join Aon, we had to say, and he would say, where's my coaching? Where's my support? Oh. Well, we could put a structure together, but ironically, the people who probably can benefit the most from changing the way they do things and change are the ones that push the coaching away, and the ones that are already at the top of their game are the ones that want more. So a final point on that was when I was at Coca-Cola, we were outselling the competitor at the time in the UK, the other bottlers in the UK, 4-1. So already right up there. So there was a mindset which was called beyond number one. How do we move from beyond number one to keep ahead?
Wow, fascinating insights. I love that. I have to say, what was it, 6, 7 different coaches as well with your previous example? Yeah. That is quite a WhatsApp group, isn't it? I think when you share some of those successes and some of those failures side by side, we can see a really clear pattern. And the research shows it too. McKinsey finds that transformations are 6 to 8 times more likely to succeed if leaders are communicating that clear, consistent story, and if they stay visibly aligned as well. So in your experience, where do leaders most often get it wrong? Is it overconfidence? Is it poor communication? Is it ignoring culture?
Probably all of the above. Okay. But if I focused on one of those, it would be cultural change, and everyone's own personal expectations and ways of working. I worked with a global bank that had a real challenge in implementing a cultural change. They'd done a lot of work in the preparation of the change, lots of pamphlets, a big launch event. They've flown people in from all over the world into India, T-shirts for the whole new initiative, a fantastic 2 days. And then people went back to their offices around the world, and the senior leadership pretty much, that's it. We've launched, therefore there's a change. Let's get back to some work now. And went back to doing exactly what they've done before. Well, of course, the targets of the change, the employees are looking up and are not seeing the example of the new culture from the very top, far from it. Which is why they then thought, well, actually, it's not that important because I'm not being shown what good looks like. So there's a really, really important aspect here, whether it's cultural change, whether it's procedural change, or whatever, that it is role modeled from the top. Wow. It's role modeled, and then people know what good looks like.
Absolutely, and I think that's a really important message. Being able to see that change from the top means all of us need to, I guess, pull up our socks a little bit and say, okay, a little bit each day really does make a difference. Leaders always ask for a playbook, as you know as well. Now, research shows that projects with excellent change management are around 7 times more likely to reach their objectives, particularly from the military world. You would know more than any of us that discipline and clarity are obviously vital when it comes to change. You've got another great video example for us from Major General Paul Nansen. Now, he is the former commander of the Royal Military Academy in Sandhurst, and he's got 4 important tips for leaders guiding transformation. Let's take a look at that video.
First really is about how do you connect your people to the purpose. We call it in the military mission focused. How do you make sure they understand why change is important, why the destination is worth the effort, no matter how tough it might get. Second, I think it's about people will be scared of change, like being in crisis. People will be nervous. And therefore, as senior leaders in particular, we've got to try and create the certainty in and amongst all the uncertainty. And for me, that's about understanding first and foremost what not to change. What part of the organization becomes a handrail, whether it's our ethos, our discipline, our values, our standards. Third, I think, going back to my point about people will be nervous and frightened of change, is leaders need to communicate, and I would say they need to over-communicate. Communication, little and often, to provide that reassurance. And that communication needs to be properly focused, it needs to be clear, concise, honest. It needs to make sure it understands the audience it's intended for. Sometimes how we communicate is just as important as what we communicate. And lastly, and perhaps most importantly, it's about leaders creating that reservoir of trust with those they're privileged to command. And particularly in change, particularly when things get tough, your people will follow you, rather like through crisis and danger, will follow you because they believe in you as a person and a leader. And so that for us means we've got to build that reservoir of trust way before we enter those change challenges.
Some great advice there, and I think he's quite right. Often it's knowing what not to change that can make just as big an impact. And let's be honest, none of us really like change. Tell me, when you advise executives, is there are there models, are there toolkits that you lean on that really echo these kinds of objectives?
Yeah. I think before I answer that specifically, just picking up on the second point that General Paul mentioned there, which was about the handrail in change, what doesn't change. Yeah. One of the features of Sandhurst, which is over 200 years old, is it still feels the same. Mm-hmm. And of course, in a military environment, like a number of other environments, technology changes, politics change, ways of working change, but your values can stay the same. Mm-hmm. The way you treat people, the way you communicate, what your priorities are, those things are really crucial to give you a sense of stability when everything else is changing around. And again, those should be role models from the top. When it comes to suggested models and so on, there are countless ones out there. I typically use one, and if some people may be familiar with it already, and the book is a Harvard Business School publication. I don't get any commission for it, but it's Leading Change by a chap called John Cotter, and it provides 8 steps for leaders when they're going through change. And there's some really, really important ones in that. It's sequential, and it allows you to almost measure yourself against each step as you go through it. And the first is establishing a reason to change. I was taken yesterday by His Excellency's introduction to the conference, and some of the imagery that was behind on the screen here about the consequences of not changing. That's providing a fantastic message in terms of why we should change. And then the vision of what it's going to be like when we do change. So that establishing a reason for change and a vision is really, really important. But the other key bit, which in my experience dealing with clients sometimes provokes a response which is, wow, we didn't get that right, is the second step, Ethan, which is establishing a guiding coalition. So finding the key people that will back this and make it happen. And that includes people in the hierarchy and the key people with the specialty knowledge to make it happen, but also identifying what we call key opinion formers. So it doesn't matter what position they are, when everyone is presented with a vision or a plan, they look at somebody, so Dave over there, and what does Dave think? And if he thinks it's a good idea, right, I'm off. If he doesn't think it's a great idea, or Davina doesn't think it's a great idea, then we've got a problem, because they listen to them. So identifying, forming that guiding coalition. The other one which comes, I won't go through all 8 now, but one of the later ones is about establishing quick wins and reinforcing those. And what organizations get wrong, and I've identified one when I talked about that cultural change, which is declaring victory too soon. We've implemented this, fine, we can now all go back to doing some work. That's a really key one, because that's when General Paul talks about it getting tough, and we may be going back to the way we did things before. It's having the courage and the discipline to keep going the way you want, and also acknowledging it's going to be difficult, clumsy, take a bit more energy and effort before it becomes habitual.
Yeah, and I think, there's a quote that always resonates with me, that the success of your life depends on how comfortable you can get with being uncomfortable. And I think that's similar messaging there as well. Well, let's talk a little bit about the energy transition underway. Of course, we are here, day 2 of the World Green Economy Summit. I want to talk to you about the energy transition underway. Certainly a lot of big challenges, big opportunities as well. The IEA says clean energy investment, we need about $4.5 trillion annually if we are to get to net zero by 2030. Of course, big challenges. We see delays, policy reversals that are piling up, and leaders are constantly under pressure to be able to deliver fast, visible results without costly mistakes. How are you seeing technology help us manage this transition from a leadership point of view? Is it AI, digital twins, advanced modeling? How are you incorporating technology to help leaders manage that transition today?
Well, I think AI in particular will, if used correctly, will be a massive boost to leadership effectiveness. Having better information, more accurate analysis and recommendations for plans is going to be a huge benefit. But one of the areas that technology will not overtake is the human element of leadership. And it's often really undervalued, because it's difficult to measure the impact of it. So leadership is about taking people to somewhere they've not been before. Management is about checking that we're on track, and checking the same things day after day after day. Leadership is the soft stuff that gets people to move. There was a documentary in the UK a number of years ago now about the transformation, a change within a hospital in the UK. And there was a fascinating set of clips of the CEO of the hospital, who was encouraged by the consultant who was helping them at the time to get out and see more of the hospital rather than sit in the office and conduct meetings and look at data and so on. And the reaction initially was, well, what can I do? I'm not a clinician. I can't do that. I'd be wasting my time going out there. They said, no, just try it. Just try it. So the CEO went out and he walked the floor and he did a few ward visits. And he spoke to the nursing staff, he spoke to the doctors, he spoke to the patients, and then he went back. And he was asked at the end, so how did you find that? What was that? And he said, well, I didn't really add anything, I don't think I did, because some of the questions they asked me, they could have made those decisions themselves. But then they went to the nurses and the patients and so on. And the reaction from them was, it was fantastic to see him. It was great to see him. It made us feel so much more valued, because we were able to communicate with him. We now know he knows our point of view. It was hugely valuable. It's a bit like some of the royal visits that we have in the UK. You know, King Charles isn't going to put the train back on the tracks, but he's going to be able to empathise with, sympathise with, and show those who were affected that they're really valued and that they're cared for. So the human element can't be replaced by data. I often encourage my clients just to get out more. And if they've got a global business, you're going to be on the plane, all right? You're going to be out there seeing people, because if you are more in touch, and I do, by the way, I'm very aware that both His Highness and His Excellency do see that as a really important part of what they do. I know Sheikh Mohammed does take a lot of time in being accessible and seen and walking around. Really, really important. And so many leaders back in other fields will make the mistake of thinking that they're leading by sitting in a meeting, looking at a set of spreadsheets, rather than going out to inspire. I've just got one more example of that. Again, in the military, the senior leaders make a real point of being visible. So it's rather like going out as a general and standing on a tank so you can be seen by so many people out there. And when I was at Aon, I was talking to my then boss, and I said, listen, you've got a national business here. You probably benefit from going out there and spending some time visiting the people. And on this particular occasion, he went out to an office in Leicester. I know some people know Leicester out here. Went to an office in Leicester, and he met the employees, he spent time with them, he had lunch with them, he gave a bit of a presentation in the afternoon, he had a question and answer session, and at the end he turned around to me and he said, Craig, that's me standing on my tank. And I said, absolutely, that's what you're doing. So many people saw you today, and your body language, your mood, your tone set the tone for everybody else. There's a phrase at Sandhurst which is used, which is officers or leaders. Officers don't run because it frightens the troops. So a sense of urgency, but not a state of panic.
I like that, and I think you bring up a really important point. We regularly see, leaders of the UAE, Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, UAE Vice President, Prime Minister, and ruler of Dubai. We frequently see him at shopping malls, at service stations, in the desert, and it's an incredible message. I think you see him with school children and executives and the everyday person as well, and it's something that I think is incredibly unique about this part of the world. But also on a business front, someone like Richard Branson, I always love those stories when he would fly on Virgin, which perhaps hasn't done that well. But when he'd be flying, he'd go down to economy and he'd sit down with everybody in economy and say, right, tell me the truth. What do you like? What do you don't like as well? Do you think we see enough of that these days? Or do you think we still see a lot of leaders in these ivory towers as such? Do you think most people are really in communication, really aware of what the everyday person or everyday employee is going through?
It depends on the organisation and the style of the leader, but I don't think you need to do too much. Clearly, once you've got onto the dance floor, if like, you can dance for a while, but you've got to get back on the balcony to see where it's going. And Steve made an important point about leaders being able to look outwards, not just internally. And that's really, really crucial. So, but being able, so in the military, you don't want your general to be fixing bayonets and going to the front. You do want them to be close enough so that they can be visible, but they've got to be able to see the big picture. But to get the mood and the tone and your own message across, yes, you've got to be there. One more anecdote. I worked for a while at the rugby union, for those who follow sport and rugby. And at Twickenham, there's a big open plan office, and the CEO's offices at the end of that. And they were going through a particularly difficult time. And the leader at the time, the CEO, a chap called John Steele, he made a point of going into work and coming through the office at the far end of the floor so he could walk through and show everybody how he was feeling that day, say one or two words, put his game face on, go through and sit in the thing. And I had one bit of feedback from one of the employees, which was, it makes us feel so much better when we see John walk through the office with his head held high. Just makes such a difference.
And that's the thing, I think, that positive or negative leadership at the top really does affect the entire company mindset. I think often we see transformation potentially fail because leaders wait too long to enact change. What is the one thing you feel they must stop postponing today?
Again, there's a number of answers.
Okay, you can give me a few.
I would again boil it down to you're right, people got to move quickly. So again, from a military experience, getting to a workable plan, you'll get 80% there in 20% of the time, and then you'll be spending 80% getting that last 20 across the line. The challenge is to get to the workable plan, you know it works, and the 80% of it, go. Implement, because otherwise you're behind the curve. Other people are going quicker than you are. But in order to do that, you've got to give time to plan. So getting out of the weeds, so you've got time to plan for the future. Stephen Covey, who's the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he has a priority quadrant. So we spend a lot of time working on priority 1, which is important and urgent. So it's day-to-day firefighting. Priority 2 is important but not urgent. So I don't do it today. It isn't the end of the world, but it's still very important. Planning and time spent looking at the future and thinking strategically falls into that priority 2 box. The trouble is, if you don't deal with it at a right time quickly enough, it then goes into priority 1 and it becomes a crisis. Yeah. So my answer to that typically is put time aside to plan and to think strategically as a leader. Don't just deal with day-to-day firefighting.
Good advice. That old adage, failing to prepare is preparing to fail. Tell me, obviously, we need to have the right management, the right leaders at the top, but obviously support, surrounding yourself with the right teams is also key as well. Where are some of the biggest mistakes we see when there's too many yes people? Is it an intrinsic part of different cultures? We saw what happened with Fukushima or Chernobyl, when I think the real culture was that it would have been very disrespectful to signal that there was a big failure. Yeah. Is that something you see a lot of in organizations? Too many yes people?
Well, yeah. Leaders who surround themselves with yes people often are okay when times are fine.
Yes.
When times are fine and everything just potters along and people are happy. Where it goes wrong is when we get a time of transformational change or crisis. Then you need brutal honesty from the people around you. So those organizations which have got people around who will only agree with the boss will typically fail in that. In times of crisis, you do need that healthy challenge from the leadership so that you can make the best decisions you possibly can. And again, that balances with the enhanced and better information you're going to get from AI going forward. But again, there's just a lot of gut in there. For those that have seen Moneyball, which was a film about success of the Oakland A's, was it the Oakland A's? Which came about from a focus on data. Hugely successful, but at the end, they failed slightly because there were decisions that should have been made by the gut. And if you're surrounding yourself with people who can help you with just that, that challenge before you make the decision purely on data, that's important. So having that healthy balance where you can have what a chap called Patrick Lencioni calls positive conflict. So positive challenge, positive conflict, then you're in a much better place.
And I think you make a great point there. Are you typically brought into a corporate or a government during times of success or failure?
Both, really. I think that we said earlier on, there are organisations who are doing very well. I went to work with a professional rugby team in the UK, and as I walked in, he was actually their strength and conditioning coach, but he had a huge team working for him. He said, Craig, great to see you. What have you got for me this year? What's going to give me the edge? Okay. So there's nothing wrong, but then you do get clearly opportunities to work for organisations who are struggling and need some guidance as to how they can put things back together again. So it does vary.
And what are some of the biggest, I guess, failures that you've worked on with corporates? How have you helped them pivot and turn that around?
Well, I think that there's a focus on the leadership, which provides the example. leadership is about example, but it's also helping culturally the followers. So we call it followership. So the role of that, and funnily enough, that's really valuable with youth, because if you're dealing with leaders of the future, but who are at the moment in a position where they're learning to be effective team members and start to take leadership responsibility, their first challenge is to lead themselves effectively. And that's what we call followership. But of course, what does a good follower look like? When they're looking for examples, they're looking upwards. Because leaders at all levels, apart from one or two, in fact, no, at all levels, are following something. Yeah. Even at the very top. His Highness, the ruler's book, which I was very kind enough, His Excellency gave me a copy a while ago. The last chapter are his 10 top tips for leadership. And the number one tip is serve your people. So even as a very top, you are still a follower. You are still serving your people. So you are looking up for the example as to how you should behave as a follower.
Oh, I love that. Tell me, do you think we learn more from times of success or times of failure?
You learn from both. There was some work done by a chap called Yehuda Shinar many years ago on winning. Okay, and he asked a question at a lecture I was at with him about sort of what are the habits of winners, and what are the characteristics or traits of winners. And I stuck my hand up and said, they hate losing. And he said, fair enough, but I said, I can show you examples of people who hate losing who keep losing. Okay. But winners are, he said, winners debrief. Okay. Winners debrief. And they debrief when things go badly, but they also debrief when things go well. So why did we win? Why did we succeed? Why did it go so well? Certainly my time in the army, in the military, every time we went on a patrol, any time we did some form of operation, it was followed with a debrief. What went well? What are we going to continue to do? And then what changes can we make just to raise the bar a wee bit?
And I think that conversation, I think that communication is so important, particularly as I think the way we communicate now is so differently. You know, now we're all over the world and the use of technology, a lot of it is happening behind computer screens, etc., whether on Zoom or Teams or something. Tell me, if you were to give our audience 3 top tips for success on how we can all elevate our leadership today, I'm talking about practical strategies, what would they be?
As leaders, 3 things. I'm thinking particularly about change. It's key things. Like I'm going back to Cotter here now for a bit. It's establishing the vision. General Paul talked about communication, and that's over-communicate. Think of any ways. Cotter talks about under-communication to times of 100, 1,000. Just keep reinforcing the message. And expect to be busy as a leader. Expect to be busy. You're the one running up and down the place, making sure that people are comfortable, they've got the information they need, they've got the support they need to make the difference. And then don't declare victory too soon.
Good advice. Good advice. Yeah. Do you think as well different parts of the world are more open to embracing change than others? Again, you know, what I think is fascinating about the UAE is we have more nationalities here than they do at the United Nations. But obviously dealing with different cultures, different ways and norms, different languages, etc., there can be challenges in that. Do you think some people are more open to change than others?
Well, I think people embark on change for a different reason. So either something has gone horribly wrong, and that's often the case. So we've got to change because it's broken and it isn't working, an organization's failing, whatever. Then there are changes which are enforced on you, regulatory changes, or whatever. But then there are changes which is actually we can see the future, and I do think that this part of the world and Dubai in particular is taking a lead in visioning the future and getting on with getting there and getting ahead. So I think there's if we go back to Steve Armstrong's comments about where it's difficult, and that is culturally, you're so short-term focused that you don't. So I think there's a lot of large organizations in the UK, in the US, in parts of the West who are the cultural norms are so strong, and the way that they're measured is so well established. It's difficult to break out of that until, as the example he set, I mean, I went round WETEX stands the other day, and the number of new car manufacturers that I'd never heard of was amazing in there, as well as the recognised ones who are now trying to catch up.
Incredible. We've got a couple of minutes left. Tell me, in terms of your final message for the audience today, as we look ahead to the future, Craig, if you and I met back here, say in 10 years' time on this same stage, 2035, what would we need to have ensured has been carried out by leaders in order to ensure that the energy transition has been a success? What is the most important objective that you'd like leaders to be aware of today as we manage this transition?
Yeah, I think there's the most, because you ran a session yesterday with a panel who said that, you know, if you'd asked them 10 years ago what today would look like, they'd have been miles off. So it's difficult to envisage. But what I would say is that the principles of leadership, whether they're at Sandhurst, whether they're demonstrated by some of the esteemed leaders here, the principles do not change. So the need to be visible, the need to communicate, the need to support, encourage, serve, don't change. So whatever in 10 years' time, who knows what technology will look like? Who knows how the world will look? But what I guarantee is that the successful leaders will be living and breathing the same leadership philosophy then as they do now.
Great advice. Craig, thank you so much. Fascinating conversation with you today. Thank you so much for your time. Let's give Craig Preston a very big round of applause, shall we? Craig, thank you so much.
No, you're welcome.